Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to your Friday edition. A little later than normal, but hey, things happen. We are discussing Oregon football recruiting. It's a big weekend for the Ducks. It's also been a big week for the Oregon Ducks with landing two verbal commitments this week in the 2022 recruiting class. Guys, it's a short week, but yet it feels like a long week because they've landed two commitments, and that feels so long ago. Kawika Rogers, a three-star offensive tackle from Hawaii. He is the fourth best player in the state. He was first. He gave his verbal commitment Monday. And then Tuesday evening, Justice Lowe, three-star athlete, fourth best player in the state of Oregon. He gave a verbal commitment to the Oregon Ducks. And he's an athlete, but coming to Oregon as a receiver. And so we've already talked about both of those guys on the podcast already. So we're not really going to break down their commitments individually, but just more so where Oregon is at now in the 2022 class. They've got 7 players signed. 4 guys are currently committed to this program that have not signed. Trajan Williams, Grayson Halton, 2 4-stars are the other 2, along with Lowe and Rogers. And then we've seen 3 transfers. Christian Gonzalez, Sam Tiamani, and Bo Nix have all joined the mix here. And we look at this class, 14 total players committed. And I think there's some holes that have been filled, and yet there's probably some opportunities still out there that Oregon needs to be able to fill up on both sides of the football.
Yeah, I think there's no question about it. I guess we'll start offense because I think that's just the way my brain works. I don't know if I just find myself going, let's start offense, go to defense, because that's just the way my mind works. Well, with the uncertainty with Travis Dye, I think you owe yourself to take a look at running back. And they already are involved with Andrew Paul, who's like Oregon's up against the big boys right now. I think we've talked about him briefly, but go watch Paul's tape. That guy's a freak. And if Oregon were to land him, he was an unheralded recruit out of Texas going into his senior season, and then ran for like 2,000 something yards, 9 yards a carry, a ton of touchdowns. And you go watch his tape, and it's like it's earned. Like he's an incredibly talented running back. He's got great size and speed. Oregon's going to have to really effort to land him. He's looking at a lot of the top schools nationally. I've also got involved like Clemson, Michigan, I think Notre Dame, the other ones. It's going to be tough sledding, but I think a running back makes sense. I still think receivers, I know they landed low. I know there's some portal guys that they're in on, and maybe that's the direction they go. But from a prep perspective, if there's a receiver out there, I think bring him on because they need some numbers. And honestly, and maybe that's why portal makes more sense in terms of splitting up classes, because it is a lot of freshmen and sophomore currently on the roster. If you bring in a Chase Cota, who's a senior, who's been rumored, by the way, former UCLA receiver, South Medford High School, came out of Oregon, kid that has some attachments to the school. Like that would make some sense in terms of splitting up the classes too, because he's a little bit older player and somebody who would provide a little bit of veteran, maybe a leadership there. So I think both of those skill spots, I would look to add players. I don't know if there's really more need along the offensive line now that they have Rogers and Wooten in place, and they already have a lot of guys coming in. Some of this will come down to the transfer portal, how many guys they lose, but I think they can probably stand pat along the offensive line. I'm still kind of like quarterback as a spot to watch. And I don't know if there's a prep recruit in 22, and it certainly doesn't seem like we're coming down the stretch run here, and there's not a name that's set to visit or anything. But I still would keep an eye out on maybe them looking in the portal at quarterback, just because you currently have only 3 on the roster going into 22, and that's not great. Defensively, they need cornerbacks. And I think it's pretty telling that some of the names we're going to talk about visiting upcoming, and then also some of the names that just they're recruiting are at this position. Jaleel Florence obviously being the most notable one, a couple of corners out of Texas, and Kamari Terrell and Jalen Davis Robinson. I know those 3 names are always tough. That means I have to remember 3 different names. I mean, come on, it was hard enough. But I think it's notable that those are we know names at corner. I mean, those are 3 pretty highly regarded corners that Oregon is in on. Florence being a former commit, and I think everybody expects there's a pretty good chance that he ends up coming back to Oregon and committing and joining his high school teammate. Jaleel Tucker also plays corner. But I think it's a position of need. We've talked about it. And then defensive line still, right? I mean, they brought in Christian Miller. I think it sounds like they're in a good spot with him or a decent spot with him. You need to add some more bodies there, I think. I think linebacker is probably the one position I'm not sold you really need to add more. There's kind of had I know that they were short this last year, but that was really just such an aberration year with injuries where, I mean, I remember crunching the numbers in spring ball going like, do they have too many linebackers? And then we get to the fall and it's like, they don't have, they were using
nearly enough.
Using defensive backs at linebacker. I still think they could probably stand pat at linebacker. And I think you're seeing from a recruiting perspective right now, not a lot of names in 22 or in the portal that are attached are playing kind of the inside or an edge spot. So, yeah, I think defensive line and corner on defense, and I think you're pretty set at safety as well.
I'll start on defense. I'll go opposite because that's kind of how my brain works when dealing with this. The most glaring hole is cornerback. And we've talked about this a million times on this podcast. Losing DJ James and Michael Wright to James to Auburn and Wright to the NFL draft. Those are your top two corners, and we haven't seen anything from Dante Manning or Tre'Quez Bridges that gives us the impression that they can be a number one corner come September 3rd. So getting Christian Gonzalez is really helpful. And, most of the visitors that are on campus this weekend are, like Erik said, there are a lot of defensive backs in there, a lot of safeties or cornerbacks, just people who can or who have or are listed as athletes who have the body type to potentially move over to corner. To me, that's the easiest, biggest position of need. And, going further down the line, it's going to be extremely helpful for Oregon to have a bunch of younger guys, a bunch of recruits who can learn the system and come and play in their sophomore, junior, senior years. I do think it would be beneficial if they were to get another corner from the transfer portal, just because they need immediate help. And regardless of how talented a recruit is, sometimes it just doesn't pan out in their freshman year. And they could be somebody who's just not really playable, or when they are played, they're just burnt every time. This kind of goes back to like Thomas Graham and Diamador Lenore as freshmen. They were really talented, but there were still a lot of defensive lapses with them. And those are two of the better cornerbacks Oregon has had over the last decade, I would say. And so you look at that and you try to think of freshman cornerbacks coming in. I still feel like they could use a portal guy, someone with experience, maybe one of the few corners who have transferred out of Georgia, have a relationship with Dan Lanning, something like that. Secondly, I got to go on the defensive line. I've been, preaching the defensive line potential flaws all offseason. Having to replace Kayvon Thibodeau is a very, very, very tall task, and I don't necessarily think that the pieces to do that are on the roster. Whether it's bringing in a true freshman like Christian Miller in the class of 2022, if he's able to make an immediate impact, that'd be great. But that, again, goes to that criterion where he's a true freshman, just an incoming guy. Like, there's no guarantee he makes an impact. The issue with defensive line is you're not going to find a lot of edge rushers in the portal. It's just not how it goes. You may find them, but they are not established dudes. They are potential high upside guys. Maybe they're sophomores who got hurt their freshman year and never played and only redshirted, whatever the case may be. Established dudes they just don't enter the portal as defensive ends. It's just how it happens. They already are an elite talent on their own team, and they already wreak havoc on the other team and they don't need to go to a new team for that. So that's the problem with that. So they're going to have to rely on somebody who either greatly improves over the offseason on their own roster or really hope that they get an impact guy immediately as a freshman. And offense, this is pretty simple. I still think it's wide receiver. They just need more bodies. It's as simple as that. It doesn't necessarily matter how talented that player is. Obviously, it'd be great if you could land an immediate impact guy who catches 50 balls this year and has 6 touchdowns. That'd be awesome. But more than anything else, they just need people who can play the position. Travis Dye's uncertainty, or running back, probably a portal running back would be great, because although there's a lot of talent in the running back room, there's a lot of uncertainty. And despite what we saw from Byron Cardwell, who had a great freshman year last year, if he goes down, if he gets hurt, Sean Dollars is the backup, and he's been hurt basically his entire Oregon career. I'm a huge Sean Dollars guy. I do think he has a lot of potential, but he's uncertain. He's unestablished. If Dye or Riddell comes back, those guys are established. You know what you're going to get, and they're great number ones. But so I think it's worth looking in that. Offensive line, I'd like to just have some depth pieces there. I think that'd just be for me. But now we're running out of slots in my hypothetical 2022 class, so we're going to need some people to hit the transfer portal. I forgot to touch on linebacker. There's a part of me that just thinks that they're going to get a million linebackers just because of what happened last year. It's just like PTSD to Oregon. And every time they sign a linebacking recruit, I feel like the entire Duck Nation, even though Oregon fans don't like the Duck Nation, whatever, Duck Nation is going to exhale. Or they're just going to celebrate because there's not going to be no linebackers for the upcoming season. So maybe just take 6 of them. I don't know. Fill out the rest of the class with linebackers.
You already have like 14 linebackers or something. 15, I think. It's
more. We need more. Because clearly there was not enough.
A quarter of the rosters at linebacker.
Just so I'm clear, Eric, did you? Sorry, go ahead, Jared.
No.
I was making a joke. I'm being stupid.
Okay. Well, no one's stupid on this podcast. I mean, I don't think, or I think we're all stupid on this podcast. I don't know if they need another quarterback. I'm kind of good with 3. I think you roll the dice with the fact that you risk, hey, I don't think 3 quarterbacks are going to get hurt this season in 2022. That way you get an opportunity to better disperse the roster a little bit. Going long term, let Jay Butterfield, Ty Thompson battle it out in 2023. You have a freshman quarterback that also arrives, and you go from there. Linebacker, I get worried when you only have 6 guys on scholarship at that spot, but you look at the 6 who they are: Noah Sewell, Justin Flo, Keith Brown, Jackson LeDuc, and now you have Devin Jackson and Harrison Taggart. Like, the top 2 could be 2 of the best 5 linebackers in the country. They're not going to come off the field all that much unless they're too tired to play. So I don't know. That's probably one where if you had more scholarships to give, I think you would, without a doubt, say, hey, let's add one or 2 more linebackers. But they don't, because the numbers right now, as we've tracked them, 81 total scholarships have been accounted for. Now, that does include CJ Verdell on that list. So you could drop that down to 80. We all believe he's probably going to go off to the NFL. Hasn't made his intentions known. It's certainly a situation to monitor, but you also have to save one in case Travis Dye wants to come back. So that kind of washes it out. So you look at this and say there's probably for sure 4 guys that they can add to this mix moving forward. I think, are we all 3 of us in agreement that Oregon's probably going to sign more than 4 guys?
I think so.
Yeah, probably.
I think they go over 4. And it's just you look at the names that are on the team, and you look at the guys that just aren't playing football right now, and I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest if we see a couple more guys hit the portal at some point, whether it's in the next couple of weeks, days, or maybe it's leading up to spring football, or the first couple of days of spring football, or after spring football. I think we'll see a couple more trickle out of the program, and that'll free up the spots that are needed. And we had this discussion offline a couple times now. I think it's probably going to be best case scenario for any programs to have a standard of operation to have 1 or 2 scholarships available at all times because of the transfer portal, right? Like, this thing is going to be a consistent revolving door. There's going to be waves where the majority of the players hit the portal, but I don't think if you're any coach, Dana Altman does this at Oregon very well, where he almost always assures that he has 1 available scholarship to use all the way up until August or September before the season starts, just so that if someone reclassifies or if some transfer hits that portal, he's got a spot to take it. And I think if you're Oregon or if you're any college football coach out there, you probably got to do that too, right?
I mean, Oregon was hit by the opposite of this last year with Kingsley Sumatia leaving in, I think it was October, and entering the portal and heading back home to BYU. Like I think you owe it to yourself to have one or two available. You don't know what's going to happen. And for Kingsley, it's like if you're in Oregon's shoes, it's like if you were after a guy and you finished, maybe you were the runner-up in their recruitment, and they go somewhere and it's not a fit for whatever reason, and maybe they decide midway through their freshman season that this is just not a good place for me to be. You're the school that they can transfer to, and they can arrive basically and have an extended freshman year at your school kind of developing within your program. I think there's some real benefits to that. So absolutely, yeah, you carry scholarships. I think you want to hold a couple just in case of that. And especially with Dan Lanning and trying to, I think, develop his own program, his own players and personnel and maybe kind of style and identity. Hold a spot or two. Because, I mean, let's say maybe totally hypothetical, but look how much Georgia's being hit right now in the portal. Imagine if something similar happens in the fall and Lanning maybe had some role in recruiting defensive player X to Georgia. For whatever reason, it's not working at Georgia. Well, now Dan has the relationship there and maybe can, bring that player to Eugene. And that could be, I mean, Georgia's, we look at the recruiting class, like probably going to be a really good player. And that's obviously hypothetical, but this kind of stuff makes a lot of sense. So yeah, definitely. I think you definitely want to roll a scholarship or two over into the fall and into winter if you can.
Yeah, I mean, it would just make the most amount of sense because recruiting is fluid. The transfer portal is now fluid. There are these set periods of times where these things are supposed to happen, and it never works like that. It's an all season long event. And, everybody's been up in arms about the transfer portal for the last couple of weeks, after the season's really ended and during this dead period. It's only going to get arguably worse come after spring football, because then now like the precedent is set of like what the depth chart is, who's looking better, who like came into camp more prepared than you. Yep. And now you're on the outside looking in. And so you as a player are now gone. You're going to, SMU, you're going to TCU, something like that, because you're looking for an opportunity to compete. And that's what everybody's trying to do, is just looking for an opportunity to compete. But right now it's very hectic. I forgot what the number was, but I think it was like near 2,000 players have entered the portal at like all levels of college football, which is absolutely absurd. But there's only going to be more come springtime, and keeping that extra roster spot or two open, that scholarship spot, is going to be huge potentially, or it could be nothing. But with that open spot, they'll have the opportunity to go after somebody who wants an opportunity to compete. I think that's kind of like in the last year or two, I feel like that's affected Oregon with not having an open spot, just like the inability to go and potentially get somebody like a Xavier Worthy when he decided that like Michigan was not the answer and went to Texas instead. Having that open spot and like Erik said, finishing second or third in somebody's recruitment, and once they hit the portal, it's like, hey buddy, how you doing? That connection that they've made in the past and that opportunity to bring them back into a new spot where maybe they've changed their minds on a few things, whatever the case may be. I think that could potentially be something big down the road. But I don't know if that's something that Oregon should do this year. I almost feel like they should get as many kids as they can with what Lanning wants, and then see what attrition happens for next year. But I don't know. I feel like they should just go all in for this season because they only have so few spots limited. And just, if somebody hits the portal where it's a big time, then it's okay, because that's probably going to happen next year again.
All right, let's transition to this weekend. And there's been already a change since we've started recording this podcast of who's going to be here and who's now not going to be here on unofficial or official visits, because Oregon's bringing in guys from the 2022 class for officials, and some of the best underclassmen are also coming to Eugene. The first one is a change. Arliss Boardingham, a 3-star athlete who Oregon has been recruiting as a receiver out of Van Nuys, California, Birmingham High School. He's no longer going to be here this weekend. He will be here next weekend. And my instant reaction to that, guys, is knowing what has happened this week in the transfer portal, most notably Chase Cota from UCLA, going into the portal with 1 year to play. This news hit while we're recording, so I have not checked with anybody. But my just first reaction is they might be postponing Boardingham 1 week just to see what the numbers are like from a scholarship standpoint, and possibly discussing, hey, do we want to go portal and try and find a senior transfer that's going to be a one and done type guy, and we flip that scholarship a year later? Or do we want to bring in a younger guy that's going to be here for 3 or 5 years? And is that guy long-term better than someone that we could get next year? That's no slight to Boardingham. I think he's a very talented player. He was an all-conference player of the year in a very good league in Southern California. But I think that's the discussion that's happening right now.
It's an interesting thing. Receiver is a position that feels like a need, but as we established at the top, like they just got Lowe, who's a receiver. They're in on some portal guys, and maybe they feel like what Matt's saying, that Boardingham is, I don't want to say not a take, but is a little further down the pecking order right now, or that they want to explore other options, or it's something on his end. I mean, we don't know exactly, but I think what Matt's getting at makes a lot of sense if this is on Oregon's. If Oregon is the one that's kind of behind the postponement of the visit, I guess. What Matt's reasoning, I think, is pretty spot on.
What would you guys rather see, a Cota or a Boardingham?
I'd probably rather see Cota right now, just because I think you do need some experience. Boardingham obviously would allot you potentially more, more years and quality years in theory, because Cota's a one and done, I think. But I still think you want to get somebody who's a little bit more reliable and experienced, and I kind of like the Cota finishing his career out at Oregon element to it as well, with his ties to the state. So maybe that's just a little bit of bias. I really liked him out of high school, by the way. I covered him a couple of times and had the pleasure of speaking with him. Really nice kid from a really good family. But that's probably where I would lean, even though I think maybe Boardingham. I mean, I don't know. We'll see what I think what you've got there is, Cota is, what Cota is. Boardingham, you're kind of projecting, and there's a possibility that 1 year of Cota is better than anything Boardingham gives you over his career. So push-pull kind of depends on how you evaluate the young prospect as opposed to the more proven one, is where I would come from. But I'd lean Cota right now.
Cota has, I believe, 20 starts in his career at UCLA. And he's close to 1,000 yards receiving in his career. And while that's, over 3 seasons, that's nothing. Or is it 4? I can't quite remember. It's nothing to run home and put on the front page of the paper. He also hasn't played with good quarterback play until this season, and it wasn't even elite quarterback play anyways with DTR from a throwing perspective. So I think he's probably been hampered there. I would probably lean. This is one where if the numbers were not as tight as they are, I probably wouldn't make this selection. I would say Boardingham. But with the numbers where they are and the depth chart of where Oregon is at, I would probably say take Cota, because he's a one and done guy. Like Erik said, he gives you the experience playing in the Pac-12 and having almost 2 seasons worth of career starts. While it's not at Oregon, it's just he's played. He's seen a lot of football already. If Cota can't happen though, and that's kind of the one where they're in a weird spot where you can't go out, I think, and land an elite transfer at the receiver position. Like, a guy that's 1,500 career receiving yards and 15 or more total touchdowns in 2.5 years or what have you. Because there are those guys out there. There's a couple of them. But because if you take that guy, you now run the risk of maybe losing Troy Franklin or Dante Thornton or Chris Hudson. And that kind of just puts you right back in the scenario you were in, where, hey, we added a body, but now we lost a body or two because of a senior transfer. I don't think Kota's emergence at Oregon would have Franklin or Thornton or any of the other receivers being like, I got to leave. This isn't for me.
No, not at all. I kind of torn about this one because what I've been saying for the last couple of weeks is you need established veteran wide receivers on the team, and that is exactly what Chase Cota is, because he's started, like Matt said, like around 20 games at UCLA and has plenty of in-game Pac-12 experience. Played at UCLA, a big program, knows Oregon, Oregon legacy type of guy. But I'm also really interested in boarding him.
Yeah.
I like his frame and his potential, and he's going to give you at least 3 years here if he sticks with the program, which is more than Cota's one. Fun fact: we're all good at math here. But I think I got to stick with what I've been saying, or else I'll look like just some hypocrite over here. I would go with Cota too, because he provides some sort of veteran leadership, which there is none in the wide receiver room right now. I mean, Isaiah Crocker is like the most veteran wide receiver in that room. Chris Hudson has the most game experience. So they're, it's an interesting room right now. And I think somebody like Cota is much needed. But if Oregon could somehow crunch the numbers and figure out a way to get boarding him on the roster, I think that'd be great.
Yes.
Just a very unique kind of player to still be out there at this time in the recruiting period. 6'4", 220 is a wide receiver, has a huge build, kind of is like a heavier Devin Williams right now. But somebody who in a good strength and conditioning program might be able to turn a corner and become, like a full-time wide receiver rather than kind of a tweener. That Jawan Johnson, New Orleans Saints role, or Oregon could figure out a way to use him in that role, which would be cool. But I'll take Cota for right now, but we'll see if there's any opportunity for Boardingham still to make the roster. That news that he's visiting next weekend is interesting too, and we'll see as to why. But Matt could be onto something here with the number crunch.
I think in a perfect world, you take both.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's just unfortunately not going to be able to happen just because of the number crunch, like Jared just said. Now, a couple other visitors that are going to be here. I've confirmed one of them for sure. The other one, I believe he's coming, but I'm not 100% sure. They're both cornerbacks. 3-star corner, Jalen Davies Robinson from Texas, from Wenatchee. And then Kamari Terrell, 4-star from Killen, Texas, Shoemaker High School. Oregon is kind of considered the leader for both of these guys. And it kind of goes to what both of you brought up with the idea that Oregon kind of needs some depth at cornerback. And, they've got 6 guys right now, 7 if you throw in Jalil Tucker. If they can reel back in Jalil Florence, that puts you at 8. But just kind of like at receiver, you need 2 or 3 more guys at that position. And these could be those 2 or 3 more guys.
Let's hypothetically here, let's play this game a little bit. Let's say Florence is going to commit and re-enter the picture, and that brings you to 8 corners. I don't know if you need 10. I think 9's a pretty good number. I would probably be selective with these 2 kids from Texas. By the way, a lot of credit to Matt Prehm for, I think, building connections. But these are guys he was recruiting when he was at Baylor. So these are, if they land 1 or 2 of them, he's going to have played a big role in it. Obviously, Coach Demetrius Martin, the corners coach, will play a role too. But just thought it was worth acknowledging. You look at a couple guys from Texas. Prehm played a big role in kind of getting him out here in the interest. I don't know though. I don't know if both. If Florence is gonna I think you take 2 of these 3 prep corners is my opinion. And I think Florence is the most talented, so he's easily a take, obviously. And then if he's gonna come back in the fold, I think you have to pick between one of these 2. And I'd probably take Terrell based on his track speed. I think he ran like a 10.6 or something in the open 100. But I don't know. It's kind of interesting. I don't think you can really. I think it would be a lot to take all 3. Is my
yes.
I think 10 feels 10 feels like a lot of corners to carry into the season, even though we've talked about the lack of maybe top-end talent or experience there. And I also don't know if you really want to take 4 freshman corners in one class after you took 3 freshman corners in the class before it. Kind of stockpiling those classes. That's why I always thought, you get Florence and maybe a portal makes more sense than the second true freshman. But clearly, they really like these kids out of Texas. So I don't know. It'd be interesting to see, I guess, what happens with Florence if he ends up re-entering for Oregon. How selective are they? What do they do with these 2 that are coming in from Texas? Because as Matt said, I think if Oregon wants them both, they probably can get them pretty easily. I think, or have a pretty good chance at least.
I think if Florence comes back into the fold, I mean, personally, I would like to see them go after a transfer guy. But since they're going so hard after these prep cornerbacks, it makes me feel like they don't see anybody in the portal who's going to be capable or like an automatic.
They just really like these guys.
Right. Or that's probably the best, or that's probably the case, honestly. I do feel like they got Christian Gonzalez, who's a solid cornerback. And now they're just hoping that one of these guys is going to step up. I mean, and the thing is, like, Manning and Bridges have really good talent. They've both emerged. They had their moments in the past season. They just didn't have the type of moments that you'd expect to see from a shutdown corner. Like Michael Wright, like his freshman year in 2019 had those moments.
Yeah.
We were like, oh, this guy could be something. And whether that's like he learned from the tutelage of Graham and Lenore and Javon Holland and all those like veteran guys, even though Holland was a sophomore, but all these veteran guys who had in-game experience, who had been through like the trials and tribulations of what it takes to get as a lockdown corner. And maybe Manning and Bridges just didn't necessarily get that. It didn't click like it did with Michael Wright. But I think if Florence and Tucker can come in and make an impact, that'd be huge, because then you wouldn't necessarily need a transfer guy. I just still feel like they need some established dudes there. This is a super young roster across the board, and I think it doesn't get much younger than cornerback. And for them to bring in 2 more prep guys, if it's Florence and then one of the following, pick whoever you'd like. I don't know. I just feel like you're banking a lot on somebody taking a significant step forward. And maybe that happens. And maybe it just looks like this was all part of the plan. And somebody, Tucker, Florence, Bridges, Davies, whoever it is, maybe it's Darren Barkins, I don't know, just takes a huge step forward and becomes like a solid backup or a solid first stringer, a lockdown guy, just somebody who takes this monumental leap. But, that's a lot to just bank on. And I feel like if they could find somebody in the portal, maybe it comes in the spring when they save that extra roster spot and somebody transfers out from somewhere else. But I don't know. I'd prefer to see hopefully you get Florence back, and then I'd prefer to see going after the portal rather than another recruit.
Just one thought on corner. I know we have more visitors to talk about it, but I just kind of still sit here and think Dante Manning was a 5-star recruit and the highest rated corner recruit. I know he hasn't shown enough to be considered a lockdown, but you talk about making that leap. He obviously has a ceiling with his physical frame and his intangibles athletically to maybe be that guy. So that's why I guess maybe there's some optimism, and maybe there's some skill in the program that Dante or Triquez, but Dante's the one I always think of having a higher ceiling based on his recruiting profile. Maybe that's something they're anticipating.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still optimistic about his upward trajectory as well. He just has literally all the physical tools you could ask for. It just hasn't clicked yet. And maybe with Taj Lupoy and Dan Lanning's like new defense, maybe the schemes are easier. Maybe he just clicks more. Maybe Demetrius Martin gets him to figure something out. But it's still a lot to bank on because it hasn't been shown. And that's just the only thing that I have an issue with right now.
I think you take if you can get Florence back into the fold, I think you take one more at corner. And then if there's room for both, I think you do take both. And this is why. Christian Gonzalez has joined the group. Triquez Bridges and Dante Manning are, like you guys have said, have shown the ability to be good players. And I think they will make a jump. I think it's safe to assume that one of those 2 will make a jump in their play to where you feel confident about them being your number 2 corner in 2022. And then Christian Gonzalez will be your number 1. And then Avonte Dickerson played in quite a bit of games this past season and was solid. He wasn't elite or really special, but he wasn't bad either, I don't think. But the issue here is I think Gonzalez, I think Bridges and Manning, if they have good years where they, let's say Oregon does go on to play in the Pac-12 championship game and Oregon's defense is kind of as good as we think they could be because of all the talent that's back. And if they play really well, I wouldn't be surprised if 1 or 2 of those guys went pro. They're all draft eligible in 2022. You just need 1 year to pop at that position, and then you can get drafted. And if that happens, that leaves you in a position where you have Florence, Tucker, one of those 3 left, and then Barkins and Davies. So I think there's the need to go in and I look at Tucker and Florence. They're both top 50 guys. And if Gonzalez wasn't here, I would say between Florence and Tucker, probably one of them for sure would play heavy minutes. And then I would argue that both would, without a doubt, play all 13 or 14 games, whatever Oregon does. So now with Gonzalez in there isn't that necessarily that need for both of them to have to play a ton, but I think they both will if they both come to Oregon. And so I look at Terrell and also Davis Robinson as these are the guys that, hey, maybe one of them plays on special teams and one of them redshirts, or maybe both of them redshirt, but gives you that depth long-term wise down the road when in the event that maybe a couple of your upperclassmen decide to go to the NFL after the 2022 season.
I know we've really gone into the weeds on corner and this stuff, but I think it's kind of interesting. I also will say that between Gonzalez, Bridges, and Manning, in theory, there's positional versatility because those guys have all played other positions. Like Manning was playing nickel this last year. Bridges has a history with safety, so does Gonzalez. Maybe there's a long-term outlet here where I know in 22 they're pretty stockpiled at safety and nickel, but some of those guys, I mean, Bennett Williams should be done after 2022. Jamal Hill could be done after 22, and maybe it makes sense those players could eventually be replacements for those kind of guys. I'm just in terms of positional versatility, maybe there's something like that down the line. Those guys aren't even playing corner down the line, which is why you're more assertive or aggressive right now. Because again, one of the things you have to acknowledge is we're looking at these players through the purview of what the previous staff saw them as, whereas the new staff might come in and see, hey, actually, Triquiz, we really like you at this position. You're better fit.
Right.
This stuff could be going on behind the scenes, which is why maybe they're going after some more corners. That really, to me, makes sense. Because I think carrying 10 corners with 7 of them being still in their freshman years, technically, or 6, is like, that's kind of kooky talk. But if there's a plan to maybe have some new guys move around or something, maybe some of this makes more sense.
Well, I was kind of thinking the positional versatility as well, and just how this new staff kind of approaches it. And I was kind of floating the idea. It's similar to what Matt brings up with Brian Addison going back to wide receiver. But if the new staff likes Jaleel Tucker more at wide receiver than at quarterback, and then maybe that's why they're going after a bunch of new cornerbacks. I don't know. I do like Jaleel Tucker more at corner than I do in wide receiver, just from watching his game film. But he's still a tremendous athlete, and was still a great wide receiver for Lincoln this year. But that kind of, I don't know. It kind of goes to what positional versatility that Oregon has. Lanning spoke on that too at one of his press conferences. I think it was this most recent one, his first off-season press conference, and he pointed to DJ Johnson and Jackson Powers Johnson, both like playing offense and defense over the course of the year. I think there's a bunch of guys like that on the team, and it'll be really, I don't know. I'm interested to see how these numbers are going to be used. I can give my best guess, but it's probably going to be 100% wrong. And that's why we're here. It's going to be super interesting. The cornerbacks, man, that's could be a downfall moment for Oregon. We'll see.
Now, there also is a running back that's currently committed to Georgia that will be on campus this weekend. 4-star running back Jordan James out of Oakland High School in Tennessee. He has committed but has not signed with the Bulldogs, and it's been a long time since he's been committed. March 29th of 2021 is when he gave that verbal commitment, and he, for whatever reason, has not signed. He's going to go to Florida next weekend. He'll be at Oregon this weekend, 5'9", almost 200 pounds, and a guy that is projected as a day 3 NFL draft pick by 24/7 Sports. Was an All-American Bowl player. It's certainly going to be interesting to see what happens here. He was supposed to be here last weekend. That flight couldn't get connected, so he's coming here this weekend. Curious what happens. Maybe it's a Travis Dye safety net. Maybe it's a guy that Oregon just says, hey, regardless of what Travis Dye, which is what I think it is actually, regardless of what Travis Dye does, we want to add another back, and Jordan James fits that need. His fit and his addition would bolster this recruiting class in a big way.
I think running back's a position you address even if Dye comes back.
Yes.
I still think, remember Jim Mastro was talking about this, and obviously Mastro is not at Oregon anymore. And we should note Mastro just hired by Nevada to be director of ops and administration yesterday. So good for Jim for landing on his feet. Took a while for him to land a job, which sort of surprised me. I think he's actually a pretty good position coach. Although some listeners to this podcast disagree with that assessment. I still remember what Jim was saying in terms of spacing out classes about how you wanted a running back every class. Well, Oregon wasn't going to take one in this class because they took 2 the year before. But the numbers have reshuffled now because you're looking at Benson's not on the roster either.
Right.
So now you're kind of one behind on that strategy of having one every year, right? So I think this makes a lot of sense. Again, the Paul, if they can somehow, I think Paul is a better player. I know rankings wise that's not the case, but I think Andrew Paul is going to prove to be a stud and maybe a star player at some place where you're like, legitimately go watch that guy's tape. It's some of the better running back tape you're going to see this cycle, in my opinion. I think he was spectacular his senior year, incredibly put together and really, really exciting in terms of what he can do in the open field. I think a running back's a take too, Matt. Even if you have Dye back, and you probably bring that player in with the expectation that they're going to redshirt.
Yeah.
I also think it makes sense because I still don't know what Seven McGee is. And we're kind of, I think, in this podcast talking about him being a running back and a receiver in terms of the numbers here, because if he plays receiver, okay, I think they have 7 receivers kind of in the mix. But if he's playing running back, now you have 6 receivers in the mix, and you go back to having, 5 running backs. So we don't know exactly where Seven's going to fit. He could play both, which I think probably makes some sense in terms of cross-training, and he's kind of in the DeAnthony Thomas. Byron Marshall did a little bit of that, although Byron ended up going full-time receiver at some point. But I think that plays a role too. So I think a running back's a take, and I'm kind of intrigued by some of these prep guys. I would have, again, I think, taken a look at the portal, but maybe you're not. Maybe Jarek Broussard doesn't tickle your fancy, or some of these other players who are out there, and maybe you just kind of like some of these prep guys better in terms of spacing out the classes. I don't know.
Yeah, I think running back's a take as well. There were a lot of really good running backs in the portal, which kind of leads me to believe that Oregon feels good about Travis Dye, because if they were to bring in some established running back with Travis Dye, I'm not necessarily sure that would be the best answer. But since they're going mostly after prep guys where they might not be ready day one or close to being ready day one, but they have a stopgap year of Travis Dye still or CJ Verdell still, then they can develop and they don't have to worry about him. And they'll have an extra running back on the roster in case of emergency, basically. Now, that could be just totally not how it's going. And we'll eventually find out with what Travis Dye decides to do. But I think I'm not sure where I want Seven McGee to go either, because I think he would be electric as a slot wide receiver. I also think he'd be electric as a specific down type of running back, specific packages, I should say. I don't necessarily see him being effective running beneath or between the tackles rather than outside of them. But he showed a lot of grit, a lot of strength last year in these between the tackle runs, which I didn't expect to happen. He's a slight guy. He's well put together, but he's 5'8", 5'9" on a good day. But man, every time he touches the ball, it's just one of those players where it's like this. He could break one off here. He could score pretty quickly if somebody misses a tackle or whatever. So I think wherever you can put him on the field more often than not, you have to, whether that's wide receiver or running back. I think you cross-train him no matter what. I think you let Dillingham figure that out and just say, you know what, we're going to get you on the field. Regardless, getting another running back is really important, in my opinion. The way the running back was structured last year was fantastic because you lose CJ Verdell for the season after game 5, and there's no pickup after that, or not that there's no pickup. There's no drop off after that. You just say, okay, we're just going to plug the next guy. We're going to plug our next talented running back and go in there. And if they can do something like that this year, where hypothetically they get Travis Dye back, he goes down with an injury, and you just plug in the next guy. That's the type of running back room that you should have. And, getting one of these prep recruits that they're looking at would be a great step into that. And maybe one of them comes in here and shows off that he's the number 2 guy, kind of like Byron Cardwell did, was looked at like as, oh, he's going to be good positional depth. And then, nope, he's just going to be the number 2 running back and potentially be the number 1 for next year.
Yeah, I actually think I agree with both of you guys that it's a take, but I think whoever you do take, he plays in 2022. Verdell, if he does come back and Dye comes back, then yeah, maybe he doesn't play. But I don't think that's a very realistic scenario. Even if Travis Dye does decide to transfer back to Oregon, or is it just pull his name out of the transfer portal?
Right.
He becomes the number 1. Cardwell is clearly going to get carries. You don't really know what you have with Sean Dollars. We saw glimpses of him in 2019, but he was hurt in 2021 and was out of action. And so you look at this, and he could be good, and he could be rusty. Like you guys have said about Seven McGee, we don't really know where he fits. I think he has to kind of play receiver right now. And in the event that Cardwell has the year that we all think he does, he could be gone after 2023. And now all of a sudden you're left with just Sean Dollars at running back. So I think you want to have whoever comes to Oregon play in 2022. But it has to be meaningful snaps. It has to be they've got to get some production out of it to make it worth playing him in the 12, 13, 14 games, 15 games that Oregon could be playing. But this is another one where I kind of think if they had the room, I would take 2, and I would redshirt 1, and I would play 1. But they don't have the room for 2, at least not right now. It'll be interesting to see what they do with James or Paul. I'm agreeing with you, Eric. I think Paul is the guy that I would want more, but if James is your consolation prize, boy, it's a heck of a consolation.
Agreed.
All right, let's underclassmen. We won't go through the whole list here because we don't want to give away everything. There is a list on duckterritory.com, but quarterback seems to always be the popular position. Everyone is clamoring and excited to see what Ty Thompson and Jay Butterfield can do moving forward as freshmen. But Oregon's bringing in another really talented quarterback for I think the second weekend in a row now for the Ducks. Jaden Rashada out of Pittsburgh, California, Pittsburgh High School, top 50 player in the country, top 40 player actually, the 5th best quarterback in the country. This is a big time player for Oregon. He will be here on campus for an unofficial visit. He's going to be meeting up with more than a couple of underclassmen that are going to be here as well. He's got a good relationship already with Oregon staff. I don't want to say that Jaden is their top target at quarterback because, as we did in a couple episodes ago, they've got about 4 or 5 quarterbacks in this 2023 class that are high profile, that are seriously interested in Oregon. But this is up there. He is in the first tier for quarterbacks at Oregon for 2023.
And on the West Coast, I mean, it's a really good 23 class, especially Southern California. I think a couple kids out of Washington that are good, but this would be big. I mean, I think, you look at recruiting classes and a lot of the time, the way you kind of assess them is based upon the quarterback that's leading the class. That's a big part. That's a pillar of each class. Like we talk about running back needing you want a running back each cycle. You want to get a quarterback each cycle, and you want it to be one of the big names. That's part of why oftentimes you see quarterbacks kind of commit earlier than other position groups, I think, in part because that helps build the class and it helps the school to know, hey, we can go out in the trail and recruit receivers and running backs and offensive linemen and other players on offense and say, hey, we've got the 7th best quarterback or the 5th best quarterback, whatever it might be, already in the fold to kind of lead this group. So getting a Rashada or another one of these big name kids out of Southern California committed now or even in the next couple of months would be huge for momentum building in 2023 in terms of being able to sell what the class is building. And it would be big, I think, for Dillingham and Lanning, especially as kind of younger up and coming coaches here, trying to build this class and kind of trying to put some, I guess, a pillar or two, some foundation beneath it. So, the quarterback position is always important, but especially to start a 2023 recruiting class and kind of get that in motion. I know they have a commitment from Cole Martin already, but so trying to get some momentum would be huge to get somebody in here and committed sooner rather than later. Sometime in the spring would probably be great. But if you'd have a commitment at this position group by the end of spring football, I think you're feeling pretty good about kind of what the summer months and then the fall can look like in terms of building it out. Yeah,
I think this is probably the biggest fish that Oregon will go after for the class of 2023, at least for now, because it's a trickle down effect when you land somebody like Jaden Rashada. It's like Erik was saying, it's a really talented quarterback class for Southern California. They got 3 top 50 guys, all quarterbacks, led by Malachi Nelson, who's going to SC, who's the number 2 player in the country behind Arch Manning. But if they were to land Rashada, this trickle down effect is that people can look at the class and see that he headlines it, and he can do his own recruiting to other Southern California kids. It shows that this is going to be the first full class under Dan Lanning and Kenny Dillingham, and they're getting their own guy. Like Ty Thompson is not their own guy. Yep. That was a Joe Moorhead guy who's still a really talented quarterback who could become something just completely great under Dillingham, but that's not his kid that he committed or that he recruited, excuse me. And this would be that example. And this would be, a near 5-star quarterback probably towards the end of the year, the end of the recruiting cycle next year. Somebody who's going to make a name for himself at all these camps, all these all the games next year in Southern California. He's darn good too. That's the other great thing about it. He's a top 50 player in the country, a top 5 quarterback in the country too. It's important to get him on campus this early too, and get him established with the new coaching staff and just kind of pave their way into his life and make Oregon a well-known brand. I think it's important to see what UCLA kind of does with him, because I feel like that'd be one of the biggest contenders for Oregon just because he's a Southern California kid. I can't imagine USC taking 2 top 5 quarterbacks in the same class, but I don't know. They might. They do love their 5-star quarterbacks there. But yeah, this is probably Oregon's biggest fish that's on campus this weekend.
There's going to be a couple defensive linemen, top 150 players in the country that'll be here. There'll be some defensive backs that'll be here, skill players on offense that'll be here. I have to say, we're not going to run through everybody, but just seeing what the list is right now and seeing who Oregon brought in last weekend, there was a lot of excitement, hype, expectation, whatever you want to use to describe this coaching staff's recruiting ability. And it's one weekend, and you don't, and 2 now, and you don't want to make an overstatement, but seeing as a lot of these guys don't really have, deep-rooted connections out west yet. Some of them do, no doubt about it. Some of them do. Lupoy, Meat, I think Dillingham has a really good relationship in the state of Arizona. A couple other guys, I'm spacing on them right now, but they've been able to, in 2 weeks, bring in some pretty big heavy hitters for the 2022 class. Christian Miller was here last weekend, and more importantly, the 2023 and the 2024 classes. To be able to get these guys on campus unofficially, paying their own way this quickly, I just wanted to mention that. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, totally. It is. I expected nothing different. Not that I'm saying I mean, these are elite recruiters. Adrian Clem, by the way, another name with West Coast guys, Matt, from assistant coaching perspective. Now these are considered some of the best recruiting coaches in the country. And I think if it was a really quiet first couple of weekends, people would be probably, and it probably wouldn't even really carry much water, but people would be a little concerned about, you're their own. I mean, we're already seeing, slight digression, we're already seeing people on the message board be like, why are you recruiting Kamari Terrell? He's a 3-star. Why are we why are Justice Lowe and Clinical Rogers committed? They're 3 stars. This is a 4-star and 5-star program. And I'm kind of going like, my goodness. But that's the expectations that you step into at Oregon, where recruiting has been really, really good. And again, I think if this was a couple of weekends where you're like, oh, there's no sizzle, these aren't big names, what's going on? People would, and somewhat justifiably, but again, big picture, probably not, be a little concerned. Now we'll see what they can do in terms of landing commitments and building, finalizing the 2022 class. We've done a lot of talking on this podcast about that, but then also starting in 23. I think some of the names that are on the list that we have on depthterritory.com, you see the potential for what and the upside for what the 23 class could be here. Mm-hmm. And I think you're going to start seeing some commitments roll in here probably by the end of this month and into the month of February.
Yeah, I mean, the 23 class is massive. The 22 class is obviously going to take a hit because of the whole coaching change situation. It's just not going to be how it has been the last couple of years under Mario Cristobal. And you've seen the message boards on depthterritory.com where it's just like, oh, these are 3-star guys, like outside the top, 800-900. Like, what do they? Well, they have, Oregon staff has had like 2 weeks to do something. The fact that they could still get these type of guys, they could still convince a player to decommit from Utah and come to Oregon is still extremely impressive in like a 2-3 week span. And now you look at who is coming from the class of 2023 to Oregon on unofficial or official visits. These are a lot of like top 150 players in the country. These are a lot of 4-stars. These are a lot of players that are national recruits, not just guys from Oregon, not just guys from California, guys from Texas, Georgia, the southeastern area of the United States. It's impressive. And if you go on Twitter and you follow all of Oregon's assistant coaches, they're everywhere. They're going up and down the West Coast. Coach Lachlan is in a different state every single day. I follow him on Twitter. I have no idea where he is today, but I'm extremely excited to find out because he's been going like to Florida, Georgia, Texas. Coach Pallage has been in Texas for the last couple of days. Dan Lanning has been traveling up and down the West Coast. He was in Washington the other day in the Seattle area. It's impressive. These guys, I don't know who's controlling all the operations here in Eugene, but the coaching staff is making their footprint well known, and those are the type of things that you would expect to see. And here they are performing and doing it at an above average rate. So the class of 2023 is going to be a very fun one to follow because I really do think that they can get the Oregon brand out there as well, if not better than a Mario Cristobal-led staff, just because of who they've brought in, the type of players that they're looking for. And I think the youthful exuberance that this staff promotes is important in all of this. I think that's going to be a different type of vibe that goes around.
Yeah, Jared, your point about Locke, like it feels like every 90 minutes he was tweeting out this week a different photo with him at a high school with a high school coach or he bumped into
It's
Nick
ridiculous.
Saban while he was out recruiting.
Yeah.
Like that's just kind of ridiculous. He was everywhere and all through Texas, and this is probably their biggest. This is where they're connected right now. State of Texas, Georgia. You look at the state of Florida, up and down the South. They've been there, and they're tapping into those connections and being able to go out and visit schools, and potentially bring guys in for visits and whatnot. So it's certainly interesting to fun to see this play out. We will have more coverage on who Oregon is seeing, who Oregon is offering, and who Oregon is bringing in this weekend for visits officially and unofficially on duckterritory.com. Until then, check out our next podcast, which will be on Monday, barring any kind of crazy breaking news. Let's knock on wood. Travis Dye has the decision here in a little bit, and we can hop on and do another one there, breaking that down. So until then, you've been listening to the Odds and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.